Good morning. Welcome to today's COVID devotional. If you remember yesterday, Ezra had read the scriptures to the people, elevated in the center of the city. And so today we're going to see the people's response to the scripture, starting in Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 9. And Nehemiah, who was the governor, and Ezra the priest and scribe, and the Levites who taught the people, said to all the people, "This day is holy for the Lord your God. Do not mourn or weep." For all the people wept as they heard the words of the law. Then he said to them, "Go your way, eat the fat and drink sweet wine." Again, your interpretation, your version might say grape juice. "Eat the fat and drink sweet wine, and send portions to anyone who has nothing ready. For this day is holy to our Lord. And do not be grieved, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." So the Levites calmed all the people, saying, "Be quiet, for this day is holy. Do not be grieved." And all the people went their way to eat and drink and send portions and to make great rejoicing, because they had understood the words that were declared to them. Now what we see here in this first section is that when the people heard and understood what the scripture was saying, they were weeping. And I think it's a twofold weeping. I think number one, it's the joy of having heard the scripture. And then number two, it's the sorrow of having not followed the scripture up to this point. And so it's kind of this happy and sad at the same time mixture of emotion that the Israelites are feeling. So when they heard the scripture, they also listened with the intent of obeying. Because now we're going to pick up in 13 and we're going to see that they didn't just hear, like James says, they're not just hearers, but they're doers as well. James, as in the book of the Bible. On the second day, the heads of fathers' houses of all the people and the priests and the Levites came together to Ezra the scribe in order to study the words of the law. And they found it written in the law of the Lord that the Lord had commanded by Moses that the people of Israel should dwell in booths during the feast of the 7th month, and that they should proclaim it and publish it in all their towns and in Jerusalem. "Go to the hills and bring branches of olive, wild olive, myrtle, palm, and other leafy trees to make booths, as is written." So the people went out and brought them and made booths for themselves, each on his roof, and in their courts, and in their courts of the house of God, and in the square at the water gate, and in the square at the gate of Ephraim. And all the assembly of all those who had returned from the captivity made booths and lived in the booths. And so, from the days of Joshua the son of Nun to that day, the people of Israel had not done so. And there was very great rejoicing. And day by day, from the first day to the last, he read from the book of the law of God. They kept the feast 7 days, and on the 8th day there was a solemn assembly according to the rule. So we see here that the people, when they started studying the scripture, they realized here is this feast of booths that we're not doing. We haven't done it since Joshua the son of Nun led us out of Israel. Moses led them out of Egypt and Joshua led them into the promised land, but we haven't held this thing that the scripture commanded since that time. So what did they do? Well, they were reading the scripture with the intention of obeying. And so immediately they reinstituted this feast of booths and this 7-day feast, I guess, this 7-day ritual. And then as soon as this was done, they had the 8th day, which was a day of mourning. So they weren't just hearing the scripture, they were applying the scripture to their lives, and they were listening with the intent of correcting themselves. That's huge. That's a huge takeaway. We need to be reading the scriptures, not thinking what other people are doing wrong, but thinking about how it applies to us and the steps we should take, both individually and as a church body, that what is the scripture telling me to act upon? We see here that there were 10 action verbs that followed the reading of the scripture. They gathered, give, found, proclaim, went, brought, built, lived, read, and celebrated. 10 action verbs followed the reading of the scripture. I think some of these apply to us today. We should gather, give, find, proclaim, go, bring, build, live, read, and celebrate. These should be responses to Scripture. Again, as I read this one last time, think about how the Scripture should move you to gather. How does it move you to give, find, proclaim, to go, to bring, to build, to live, to read, and to celebrate? If you write those 10 words down and right beside each word say, the Scripture compels me to do this in this way, you have a list of 10 things. And that's a good place to start. You're locked at home all week, for weeks at a time, maybe months at a time. You got a list of things that the Scripture is going to move you to do. The Lord be with you today.